since this topic has resurfaced, we've seen the narrative return of this demonization of AfriForum, which really makes no sense because, of course, AfriForum is working to uplift South Africans through many activities. And so to say that AfriForum supports damage to South Africans really doesn't make sense. It's a counterintuitive narrative. And so, Ernst, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the benefits that you could see arising from this bill if it's passed into law that perhaps a lot of the media is just not sharing with us?
Well, the first benefit is the fact that the politicians that are going to be targeted by it are those engaged in corruption. So, I mean, in South Africa, and this is a tough question that I've asked, in almost like a rhetorical question in many interviews that I've done, when people parrot that ANC line of this bill is an anti-South Africa bill, it's going to hurt South Africa. I just asked the rhetorical question. Your audience can consider it for themselves. Can you explain to me, in simple terms, how sanctioning the luxurious lives of corrupt politicians are going to hurt the average South African on the street? And I'm not asking this in a snarky way or sarcastic way. I genuinely don't see the connection. I don't see how inconveniencing or hurting the luxuries of a corrupt politician in a corrupt politician's life and cutting them off from these luxuries that they enjoy, how that's going to hurt the average South African on the street. So maybe in the comment section of this episode, if someone knows, they can explain that. And that's the important thing to note, is that that's the spin. The spin that is happening is that this is an anti-South Africa bill. But from all that I can see is, though, firstly, it very explicitly targets individuals. And then secondly, it those individuals that it is targeting are individuals that are engaged in acts that are actually harming South Africans and South Africa as a whole, engaged in corruption, engaged in pushing destructive policies, engaged in either extremist rhetoric or extremist actions on the international stage, and harming South Africa's interests in the process. So, I mean, that's where the real damage is being done. And this bill is actually a check on that damage, is actually consequences for the reckless behavior of the ANC-led government. And I think that's the crux of the whole matter, is that the people that are going to be negatively affected by this bill, if it passes, are the people that are already doing major damage to South Africa. And that's a good thing. Call me controversial.
Right. I see very little controversial in that, to be honest. But while this specific bill, of course, assists from the political front, we do also know that education on the ground is important, and making sure that people understand what's going on. And so for that reason, I'd like to bring up your documentary.
Sure.
Is Trump Right About South Africa? So this documentary, brilliantly produced, as I must say, has really seemed to gain a lot of traction. You know, we've seen the likes of Elon Musk acknowledge it on X. And so I'd like to ask you, what sort of reactions have AfriForum received from this documentary?
Right. So we made this documentary earlier this year because when this whole diplomatic crisis started, there was a lot of debate and panel discussions and social media arguments, people writing opinion pieces. But it's the radioactive question that nobody seemed to want to touch, is just the simple question: is Trump actually right about South Africa? People were talking about Trump's character. They were talking about how the United States should not bully South Africa, how South Africa is a sovereign country. All of these types of points were being made, but nobody really wanted to touch that question of, well, is he actually right about South Africa? Let's leave the implications of this diplomatic crisis aside for a moment and just investigate the truth claims, or the veracity of the claims being made. And therefore, we made that documentary to actually explore that question. And to explore that question, we talked to two experts that I think are at the forefront of many of these issues in regards to their knowledge. So firstly, we talked to Martin van Staden. Now, why did I talk to Martin van Staden? Well, you and many of in your audience might have seen the fact that South Africa has more than 142 race-based laws on the books.
Yes.
Well, how do we know that fact? Well, we know that fact because Martin van Staden of the Free Market Foundation did the research. He went down into the statistics, dug into the data, and actually gave us that number. He went and did the hard, dirty work so that we actually know how many race-based laws there are in South Africa. Because before he did that, everyone was speculating. Everyone was guessing different numbers. Now we have a concrete number and we have a concrete methodology on how it was reached. So I had to talk to Martin because at the center of this whole diplomatic crisis was one of the issues was the fact that South Africa has these racially discriminatory laws that even discriminate against foreign companies like Starlink, keeping Starlink out of South Africa based on race criteria. So I talked to Martin particularly about how many race laws does South Africa have, what's the extent of it, what effect does it have. And then I talked to Dr. Theo de Jager, who is another expert in regards to the farming community in South Africa, the farmers of South Africa also being at the center of this diplomatic crisis due to the issues of farm murders being mentioned by Donald Trump and by Elon Musk and chants like kill the boer, kill the farmer. So Theo is the head of SAI, which is one of the largest farming unions, trade unions in South Africa, or farming unions. And then also he's the former head of the World Farmers Organization. So this is also someone with vast experience and knowledge about farming, not just in South Africa, but in the world. And there's another reason why I wanted to talk to Dr. Theo, and that's the fact that he was one of the victims of one of the worst and most blatant attempts at censorship that I've seen in my entire life from not just the South African government, but any government ever. And that was, so I'll give the short version of it. It's a fascinating long story. He details it in the documentary. But what basically happened was Theo de Jager was in a picture that was published by the South African government where there was a meeting at I think at the German embassy, and he was part of the group photo. And then the photo that was published by the Department of Agriculture had Mr. Theo de Jager edited out of the photograph in like Stalin style, unpersoning, this man does not exist. Why? Because he was one of the most staunch critics from the farming community against the Expropriation Act that threatens private property rights in South Africa. So I had to talk to Theo because, I mean, if you wanted to get the critique of the government in its purest form and its most genuine form, then you talk to the targets of the government's censorship. And I mean, being edited out of a government photograph is one of the most like blatant and egregious and gross versions of censorship that you can imagine. So those are the two experts that I talked to. And to conclude in regards to what the reaction was, well, firstly, the documentary got about 100,000 views or 200,000 views at the time on YouTube, which if that was all that had happened, we had just got 200,000 views and that's the end of it, it would have been already considered a major success. But then something else happened, as you mentioned. I shared it on X just to give it a little bit more of exposure, and then I can't tell you how, I have no idea. Elon Musk gets it into his hands and he shares the documentary. And the documentary jumps all the way to 45 million views. That's almost the population of South Africa. And
amazing.
I'm still flabbergasted about it to this day. That the day that happened, my phone just started exploding with notifications. I had no idea what was going on. And then I put one and two together and I realized, the richest man in the world just shared my documentary that details race laws, farm murders, and kill the boer and other issues in South Africa. And that's the other thing that's why I'm very glad this was the documentary that blew up, is because in this documentary, we actually went out of our way to meticulously ensure that every single claim made in that documentary has a source attached to it. So AfriForum made sure that this documentary, if any claim is made by anyone in that documentary, there's either a footnote that appears on screen that says here is where the information comes from, or the speaker themselves gives that information through their interview. So I'm very glad that that's the documentary, that a documentary that was that obsessed with bulletproofing and making sure that the information is absolutely watertight and sourced. That was the documentary that went viral. I'm very, very glad about that. That just shows sometimes things just work out.